On November 25, 1835, in the town of Dunfermline, Scotland, a boy named Andrew Carnegie was born. His father, William, was a handloom weaver whose craft once kept food on the table. His mother, Margaret, kept the small household steady with tireless skill and calm resolve. The family lived in a modest cottage where a loom filled more space than luxury ever could. Andrew grew up hearing the steady clack of wooden shuttles and the soft talk of neighbors. The rhythm of work shaped his earliest memories and his first ideas about effort. Dunfermline was proud, plain, and brimming with tradition that felt larger than its streets. Market days brought bustle, but coin was tight and carefully counted. The kirk bells marked each week, and school lessons were simple and short. Andrew listened closely to stories about Scottish heroes and hungry winters. He learned early that pride and poverty can share the same room. He also learned that a future is something you build, not something you wait for. The Industrial Revolution did not ask permission before it changed everything. Power looms in distant mills undercut the old handcrafts overnight. Orders thinned, wages fell, and skilled men found their hands suddenly worth less. William paced, hopeful one day and bleak the next. Margaret stitched, traded, and stretched every shilling with quiet genius. Andrew watched and absorbed how fast a stable life can tilt. Talk in the town turned from craft to machines, from guilds to factories. Some men argued for protection and others for progress. Newspapers carried bold words about workers' rights and better pay. William joined meetings and held fast to ideals about fairness and dignity. Andrew stood at the doorway, seeing his father's hope push against hard facts. He felt the sting of change, but also the spark of possibility. At home, the loom still beat out its old-time song, but work slipped away. Meals were simpler and less frequent, though the family kept their grace. Margaret's voice steadied the room when worry tried to take over. "We will manage," she said, and somehow they did. Andrew learned not to complain when there was work to do. He learned that effort is a promise you make to the people you love. By 1848, the choice no longer looked like a choice at all. Letters from America spoke of room to rise and pay to match the labor. Friends whispered about cities where smoke meant money and money meant change. William and Margaret weighed risk against hunger and chose the ocean. Andrew helped pack what little they owned and carried more hope than clothes. He left Dunfermline with a boy's heart and a man's resolve. The voyage in 1848 was crowded, cold, and unforgettable. Steerage offered little space and less comfort, but it offered a path. Andrew listened to the wind and the creak of wood and thought about tomorrow. He watched his father study charts and his mother calm frightened children. Days blurred into nights, and the sea showed its power without apology. Everyone on board learned patience the hard way. On deck, he met other families chasing the same promise. They traded stories about cities with tall chimneys and constant work. A few spoke of failure, but most clung to the brighter thread. Margaret wrapped a shawl around Andrew and reminded him to keep faith. He nodded and gripped the railing as if it were a handle on the future. "We're going to make it," he told himself, and he meant it. New York appeared like a picture that suddenly moved and made noise. Streets pressed in close, and faces rushed by with purpose. The family soon turned westward toward Allegheny, near Pittsburgh. They found boarders, odd jobs, and a city that smelled like smoke and iron. Allegheny did not offer comfort, but it offered chances. To Andrew, chances mattered more than comfort. William tried to keep weaving alive, but the trade had already moved on. Tools that once fed families now gathered dust in a new land. The disappointment cut deep and quiet. Margaret answered by finding work where work could be found. She mended, stitched, and kept boarders to hold the family line. Andrew watched her carry the family and learned what strength looks like. Allegheny felt raw, loud, and unfinished, but it felt open. Riverboats pushed past mills and bridges that rose by the month. Smoke turned the evening sky a constant gray, and people called it progress. Andrew studied the streets as if they were pages in a book. He began to see how big machines and quick trains changed everything. He wanted to be close to those engines of change. At night, the family spoke softly about what the next day might bring. Andrew promised his mother he would take any job he could get. He wanted to help and to prove their gamble was worth it. He understood that youth did not excuse him from duty. "Give me a chance," he said, "and I'll show what I can do." The next morning, he went looking for it. Andrew found his first steady job in a cotton factory as a bobbin boy. The floor shook with machines that never rested, and the air stung. His pay was $1.20 a week for long, punishing shifts. He ran spindles, changed bobbins, and kept pace with the noise. He went to work as a boy and came home feeling older. Still, he counted each coin with careful pride. The work was relentless, and the rules were not gentle. Foremen expected speed, attention, and silence. Mistakes meant lost pay or harsher hours. Andrew learned to move quickly without panic. He learned to think clearly while everything around him roared. He learned to keep going when his legs wanted to quit. He brought most of his pay home and watched his mother's face soften. The money was small but steady, and steady felt like hope. He kept a little for himself and bought simple food or paper. Saving gave him a sense that the future could be shaped, not only awaited. He began to measure days by goals, not just by bells. The habit would never leave him. On breaks, he studied the factory's rhythm with curiosity. Why did some lines move faster than others, and why did delays spread? He noticed how supervisors organized people and materials. He saw that time was the most valuable tool in the room. He wondered who planned all this and how they learned to do it. The questions seeded a taste for systems and scale. Sometimes the heat lifted and a stray breeze crossed the floor. Andrew closed his eyes for a moment and pictured a different room. He imagined a desk, a map, and a telegraph key ticking like a heartbeat. He imagined work that asked his mind for speed along with his hands. Those images did not make him restless, they made him steady. He treated each hour as a step toward that picture. News reached him about an opening for a telegraph messenger. The pay was better, and the path ahead looked broader. A friend urged him to try, and he promised his mother he would. "Go," she said, "and do your best." He walked to the office with a mix of nerves and resolve. He stepped through the door, ready to learn. The telegraph office in Pittsburgh became his new school. Wearing a neat cap and careful shoes, he learned the city by foot. He carried messages to hotels, depots, and offices that hummed with purpose. He memorized routes and names until the streets felt like a map in his head. He learned who made decisions and who made those decisions happen. He learned to arrive before he was expected. Deliveries were tests of speed, memory, and tact. Andrew greeted doormen by name and remembered clerks others forgot. He spoke clearly, listened hard, and made himself useful. A messenger with good manners was remembered and trusted. He began to recognize faces that shaped Pittsburgh's growth. He also learned that small favors create large doors. Morse code caught his eye and then caught his heart. The language of dots and dashes felt like music with purpose. He stayed after hours to practice at an empty desk. He listened for rhythm and trained his ear to hear patterns. Before long, he could take messages by sound alone. Accuracy made him valuable. Speed made him impossible to ignore. Railroad talk filled the office, and one name carried weight. Thomas A. Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad visited often. Andrew watched how men leaned in when Scott spoke. He delivered messages cleanly and stood ready if anyone needed help. Scott noticed the boy who noticed everything. Opportunity often starts with being seen. Not every day was smooth, and not every message was simple. A missed call or garbled word could ruin an hour. Andrew felt the sting of small failures and learned to correct fast. He stayed late to fix what he broke and to master what he feared. "I can do better," he told himself, and then he did. That promise turned into habit. His wages rose with his skill, and his circle widened with his reliability. He was more than a runner now. He was part of the network. The city's pulse traveled through the wires and through his hands. He sensed how railroads, bridges, and mills connected into one system. He wanted a place inside that system where decisions were made. He began to think in plans instead of wishes. On Saturdays, a door opened that changed his life. Colonel James Anderson lent books to working boys free of charge. Andrew walked in shy and walked out carrying a world. He took histories, biographies, and practical guides with equal hunger. The smell of paper and leather felt like a second home. Knowledge began to feel like capital. Even after long shifts, he read with a steadiness that surprised him. He met Benjamin Franklin on the page and found a model for the mind. He learned how small habits become large outcomes over time. He copied lines that mattered and tested them in daily choices. Reading quieted fear and sharpened purpose. It taught him that effort multiplies when guided by sense. He joined other young workers who wanted more than a paycheck. They formed a small circle to read, debate, and write short pieces. They spoke about industry, character, and the duties of success. Andrew practiced saying ideas out loud and learned to accept critique. The circle gave him confidence without giving him pride. It reminded him that growth is a shared climb. At home, he spoke softly to his mother about what might be. "We won't be poor forever," he promised with careful certainty. She looked at him, tired but believing, and nodded. He kept his voice humble and his plan clear. Work would fund learning. Learning would open doors. Doors would lead to responsibility, and responsibility would lead to change. He set small targets and met them, then set larger ones. He saved a steady portion of every rise in pay. He practiced mental arithmetic and kept neat notes on expenses. He studied maps of the rail lines and read about new machines. He began to see where demand was growing and why. Ambition, he realized, was planning plus patience. By the end of this beginning, a path had formed. A boy from a weaver's cottage had stepped into a moving world. He carried messages, mastered a code, and built a habit of learning. The city had tested him and found him willing to be tested again. Opportunity was no longer a rumor, it was a direction. The next chapter would turn direction into a decision. When Andrew Carnegie stepped into the offices of the Pennsylvania Railroad, he entered a different world. The noise of trains, the steady click of the telegraph, and the smell of coal told him this was where America's future was being built. Thomas A. Scott, a sharp and respected railroad executive, quickly recognized Andrew's determination and resourcefulness. Scott offered him a position as his personal secretary and telegraph operator, giving him a desk at the heart of a vast transportation network. The young man soaked in every detail of how the business worked, from the flow of paperwork to the decision-making process in emergencies. It was here that Andrew began to learn that speed and accuracy were the true currency of industry. The Pennsylvania Railroad was more than just tracks and trains. It was an intricate system of schedules, freight demands, and constant communication. Andrew saw how a single delay in one part of the line could ripple across hundreds of miles, causing chaos. He studied the way Scott handled these challenges, making quick, calculated decisions to keep the system moving. Carnegie memorized routes, learned the costs of moving goods, and understood how seasonal changes affected freight traffic. His job wasn't just to type out messages, it was to anticipate problems and be ready with solutions. He soon became known as someone who could be relied upon, no matter the situation. Promotion came naturally because Carnegie's reliability spoke for itself. Within a short time, he was helping manage the Pittsburgh Division, a critical artery in the railroad's network. He oversaw scheduling, ensured trains ran on time, and coordinated the movement of both passengers and goods. This meant working closely with engineers, conductors, and yard managers to ensure everyone was on the same page. Mistakes were costly, and Carnegie learned to think several steps ahead to prevent them. His reputation for precision and calm under pressure was becoming one of his greatest assets. Scott's mentorship extended beyond daily tasks. He taught Andrew the principles of strategy in business. Carnegie learned that control was about preparation, knowing what could go wrong and having a plan for it. He understood the importance of spreading risk across multiple suppliers and routes, so that no single failure could cripple the business. Rewarding good work and replacing weak links became part of his management style. Carnegie copied these rules into his own notebook, treating them as commandments for future ventures. The discipline of the railroad would shape every business decision he made afterward. The connections he made in the railroad business were just as important as the work itself. Every day, he met shippers, financiers, and contractors whose influence stretched far beyond Pittsburgh. He listened to what they needed and offered help when he could, knowing that trust built opportunities. These relationships planted seeds that would later grow into partnerships, investments, and contracts in entirely different industries. Carnegie was not just building a career, he was quietly building the foundation of his fortune. He knew that the right contacts, combined with the right skills, could change his life forever. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, the Pennsylvania Railroad became even more vital. The Union needed troops, weapons, food, and supplies moved quickly, and railroads were the lifelines that made it possible. Thomas A. Scott took on a federal role overseeing military transportation and brought Carnegie with him. Andrew was now responsible for coordinating trains and telegraph lines to ensure the Army got what it needed when it needed it. The work was relentless, with no room for error. A single missed shipment could mean defeat in battle. Sabotage, broken rails, and burned bridges were constant threats during the war. Carnegie organized repair crews who could respond quickly, often working through the night to restore vital lines. Telegraph operators were trained to send and receive messages without a single mistake. He learned to position resources in advance so that emergencies could be fixed before they escalated. Under his coordination, damaged routes were restored faster than the enemy could disrupt them again. This efficiency saved lives and kept supplies moving to the front lines. The war was a masterclass in large-scale operations. Carnegie saw firsthand how to manage complex logistics across vast distances under extreme pressure. He learned to delegate authority to capable people and hold them accountable for results. He kept meticulous records so that decisions could be based on facts, not guesses. He also saw how the speed of communication through the telegraph was just as important as the speed of the trains. These lessons would become the backbone of his future enterprises. Telegraph expansion became a side business opportunity during the war. Carnegie understood that messages were the nerves of the nation. Without them, the whole system slowed down or collapsed. He invested in extending telegraph lines alongside key railroad routes. This not only supported the war effort, but also generated steady profits from civilian and commercial use. It was an early example of how Carnegie could spot a profitable opportunity within his primary work. Military necessity also revealed weaknesses in existing infrastructure. Wooden bridges, for example, could not withstand the weight of heavier trains, carrying troops and artillery. Carnegie saw that iron bridges were stronger, lasted longer, and would be in high demand even after the war ended. He made detailed notes about these needs, storing the information for future investment decisions. By the time the war was over, he was ready to move from managing operations to owning the businesses that supplied them. With savings from his railroad salary and war work, Carnegie began making his first serious investments. He put money into businesses that he understood well from his time in transportation and infrastructure. One of his earliest successes was investing in the Woodruff Sleeping Car Company. These luxurious train cars offered travelers comfort on overnight journeys, making long trips far more appealing. Railroads quickly saw that offering sleeping cars could attract more passengers. This investment brought Carnegie both profit and valuable connections. Another lucrative move was investing in the Oil Creek region of Pennsylvania. This was at the dawn of the American oil industry, and demand for kerosene lamps was exploding. Carnegie chose his partners carefully and avoided reckless speculation. He didn't aim for quick, risky gains. He wanted steady returns over time. The oil investments added another stream of income to his growing portfolio. This discipline in picking investments would be one of his lifelong strengths. Perhaps his most important early investment was in the Keystone Bridge Company. At a time when many bridges were still made of wood, Keystone specialized in constructing iron bridges that could handle the increasing weight of trains. Carnegie understood that stronger infrastructure meant safer, faster travel and fewer costly accidents. His role in the company wasn't just financial. He helped win contracts and applied his logistical knowledge from the railroad to improve efficiency. Keystone's success solidified his reputation as a forward-thinking businessman. Carnegie didn't invest randomly. He built a network of related industries that supported each other. Bridges required iron, oil provided lighting and lubrication, and sleeping cars filled the trains that traveled across those bridges. Each business fed into the others, reducing his risk and increasing his influence. This web of interconnected investments meant that when one part of the economy slowed, another could keep his income flowing. It was a practical, almost scientific approach to building wealth. The results spoke for themselves. Dividend checks began arriving with regularity, and Carnegie reinvested them carefully. He judged business partners by both their results and their character, refusing to work with anyone who lacked integrity. He kept detailed records of every deal, ensuring he knew exactly where his money was and what it was doing. This combination of caution and ambition allowed him to grow his fortune steadily without losing control of it. As Carnegie's business interests expanded, he realized that large-scale projects required more than personal savings and local investment. Many ambitious ventures in America needed foreign capital, and Europe was the best place to find it. Carnegie traveled to London to sell bonds that would finance major American enterprises. These trips were more than business. They were lessons in how global finance worked. He learned to present investment opportunities in a way that was both honest and persuasive. Trust was the currency in these dealings, and Carnegie earned it through preparation. He arrived at meetings with audited financial statements, detailed reports, and solid evidence of profitability. He explained the risks as well as the rewards, knowing that transparency built long-term relationships. Bankers saw that he wasn't just selling ideas. He was offering well-structured, practical investments. His straightforward approach set him apart from the fast-talking speculators of the era. In Europe, Carnegie also gained a broader perspective on industry. He toured factories, steelworks, and rail yards, paying close attention to efficiency and technology. He asked questions about machinery, labor organization, and material handling. These observations were carefully recorded for later use in his own ventures. It became clear to him that adopting the best methods from both sides of the Atlantic could give him a competitive edge. The relationships Carnegie built in Europe became a valuable network. He kept in touch with bankers and industrialists who could be called upon for future projects. He made it a point to deliver on every promise, no matter how small. This reliability meant that when he needed financing later for larger ventures, he had allies ready to support him. Reputation, he learned, was an asset that compounded like interest. Carnegie also developed a keen sense of timing when it came to raising capital. He learned to launch bond issues during periods of economic stability and high investor confidence. He avoided the markets when fear and uncertainty were high, even if that meant delaying a project. This patience often meant securing better terms and lower interest rates. By mastering these financial strategies, Carnegie ensured that his businesses had the resources they needed without becoming overburdened by debt. By the late 1860s, Carnegie was convinced that steel was the future. Railroads were expanding rapidly, and heavier locomotives demanded stronger rails. Bridges, ships, and buildings all needed a material that was both durable and affordable. The new Bessemer process for making steel promised exactly that. Carnegie began studying every aspect of steel production, from raw materials to finished product. He wanted to be ready when the time came to make his move. Preparation was everything. Carnegie researched the best locations for steel mills, focusing on areas with access to coal, iron ore, and limestone. He studied transportation routes to ensure that raw materials could reach the mills and finished steel could reach buyers efficiently. He also began identifying the best people to manage different parts of the operation. This level of planning meant that when he entered the steel business, he would already have a strong competitive position. His network from the railroad years proved invaluable. He had contacts with major railroads that would need steel rails by the mile. He knew bankers who trusted his business judgment and would finance large projects. He had relationships with builders and engineers who could construct and run efficient plants. These connections gave him a ready-made market and the means to serve it. Carnegie understood that controlling the entire process from raw material to finished product was the key to success. He wanted to own the mines, the mills, the rail lines, and the distribution networks. This vertical integration would allow him to control costs, ensure quality, and deliver on time. It would also protect him from fluctuations in supply and pricing. It was a bold strategy, but one that would later define his empire. By visiting steel plants in Britain, Carnegie learned how to avoid waste and improve efficiency. He studied how workers were managed, how heat was conserved, and how production schedules were optimized. He returned to America with a notebook full of practical improvements. The pieces were now in place: capital, contacts, and knowledge. All that remained was to put them together and begin building the steel empire that would make him one of the wealthiest men of all time. The need for stronger rails pushed Andrew to search for a better metal. Reports from Britain spoke about a fast new way to make steel. He crossed the Atlantic and watched the Bessemer process in person. Air blasted through molten iron and burned off impurities quickly. The heat rose, the metal brightened, and costs fell hard. He saw a tool that could change the scale of everything. The process looked simple, but the details were demanding. Not all iron worked well, and chemistry mattered as much as heat. Phosphorus ruined batches unless you chose the right ore. Manganese, added as Spiegeleisen, steadied the final mix. Timing, angle, and airflow decided success. Andrew learned that speed worked only when science was exact. He returned to Pittsburgh, convinced the future had a timetable. If he moved first, his price could run ahead of every rival. If he built big, his costs would drop with every pour. He hired chemists and foremen who trusted measurements over guesses. He wrote partners that steel would feed railroads for years. "We will lead," he said, "and others will follow." Early trials were rough because change never feels smooth. Bad heats wasted money and bruised pride in the shop. Andrew refused to blame the men and blamed the process control. He pushed for better ore, tighter tests, and clear rules. He praised small gains and folded them into standard practice. Improvement became the shift's normal assignment. He needed a manager who could turn ideas into output. Captain William R. Jones, tough and gifted, fit the job. Jones drilled crews, enforced safety, and chased minutes off each step. He listened to workers who knew where delays hid. He pushed repairs at night to save daylight for runs. Together, they made science and discipline pull the same way. Orders for steel rails began to arrive with new force. The Pennsylvania Railroad wanted rails that lasted longer at speed. Track crews liked steel that did not chip under heavy wheels. Each successful shipment built a reputation that ads could not buy. Price fell as volume climbed, and volume climbed because price fell. The engine of cost and demand finally clicked. Andrew chose a site at Braddock and named the works for J. Edgar Thomson. The Edgar Thomson Works opened in 1875 with Bessemer converters ready. Rails poured, cooled, and moved out by the mile. The plant layout cut wasted motion and kept furnaces fed. Tracks ran through the yard to speed transfers. Every corner tried to save time. Growth required more than one strong mill. He expanded capacity, added furnaces, and improved cranes. He bought and rebuilt where it made sense to move fast. The culture favored upgrades over excuses and math over pride. If a machine saved an hour, they bought 2 of them. If a layout saved steps, they redrew the whole floor. Homestead entered the story as a powerful addition. In 1883, the company took control of the Homestead Works. It focused on plate, shapes, and later armor for ships. Deep water near Pittsburgh was not needed. Rail and river were enough. Homestead's wide mills turned out heavy products at scale. Together with Braddock, it formed a steel backbone. Vertical integration tightened the grip on cost and quality. Coke came from H.C. Frick's ovens to feed the blast furnaces. Ore moved by lake boats and rail from the upper Midwest. Inbound raw material met outbound rails, beams, and plate. Owning links meant fewer surprises and stronger margins. Control upstream protected promises downstream. New processes kept adding options and strength. The open hearth, Siemens Martin, method joined Bessemer at key shops. It allowed careful heats for plate and structural steel. Rolling mills widened and lengthened to fit larger orders. Overhead, cranes replaced slow teams of men with hooks. The plant changed shape to match the market it served. Organization scaled as the mills scaled. Partners, like Henry Phipps, guided finance and contracts. Foremen earned bonuses when costs dropped without cutting safety. Maintenance schedules turned downtime into a planned event. Accounting tracked pennies per ton with stubborn accuracy. The rule was simple. Fix what is weak, then fix what is next. Dominance came from price, and price came from cost. Andrew watched every input the way a pilot watches fuel. Cheaper coke, better ore, and fewer steps lowered each ton. As cost fell, he cut prices and still earned more margin. Rivals matched if they could, but most could not. Scale became both shield and sword. Reinvestment was a standing order, not a debate. Profits went back into faster rolls, stronger cranes, and better furnaces. He retired equipment early if the numbers proved the case. Pride in old machines never beat proof on paper. A small edge repeated across thousands of heats made a fortune. Time rewarded the mill that never stood still. Sales strategy matched the engine room. He signed long contracts with railroads that needed steady supply. He promised delivery and then built capacity to keep it. Middlemen were trimmed when direct deals saved everyone money. He offered prices rivals could not sustain for long. Market share moved his way one shipment at a time. Cost sheets became the quiet power in the office. Every department reported numbers that told a story. He believed that watch the costs and profits will follow. Managers learned to cut waste as a daily habit. Rewards favored clear thinking over loud promises. When trouble rose, the sheet pointed to where it lived. Tactics stayed legal, but never gentle. He met a rival's price and then shaved a little more. He took thin margin orders to keep his mills hot. He outlasted companies that could not carry losses for a quarter. He offered partnerships to strong competitors and bought weak ones. The field narrowed while his reach widened. Quality never left the room while price led the talk. Rails were tested, plate was checked, and beams were measured. Failures were logged and traced back to a step, a heat, or a man. Fixes were turned into rules instead of lectures. Engineers trusted steel that behaved the same every time. Reputation closed deals that price alone could not. Andrew believed in lifting workers while pressing for hard results. He built reading rooms and encouraged learning off the clock. He funded local libraries and set up small clubs at the mills. Prizes and bonuses recognized crews that solved problems. A foreman with ideas could move fast in the system. The message was simple: rise with the company. Discipline stood beside kindness and never stepped back. Shifts stretched to 12 hours in crowded, hot rooms. Sliding wage scales tied pay to market prices for steel. Unions found little space inside that tight control. Henry Clay Frick enforced policy with a firm and public hand. Output rose, and tensions rose with it. Promotion from within gave the shop floor a ladder. Men who learned new processes earned more and led teams. Safety rules improved as machines replaced the most brutal tasks. But the pace demanded attention, strength, and steady nerves. Captain Bill Jones pushed for better guards and smarter layouts. Even so, steel was a hard teacher in every season. Communication tried to clear the air before it burned. Andrew wrote partners and managers in direct, short letters. He praised numbers, not flattery, and asked for proof with claims. Bonuses rewarded the facts those numbers confirmed. Wages stayed low by design to keep costs in line. The mix fed profits and fed resentment at the same time. Housing near the mills kept families close to work. Boarding houses filled with men who slept and returned to the floor. Company stores and local merchants lived off the pay cycle. Sundays brought church, rest, and laundry if the shift allowed. The mills set the rhythm that towns marched to. Pride and fatigue sat together at every table. Pressure gathered like heat in a ladle before the pour. Crews wanted more say, more pay, and safer routines. Management wanted lower costs and full control of change. Talks grew sharper as orders filled the book. People chose sides and waited for the next move. The line held, but it shook. Andrew became a public figure as his furnaces lit the sky. Newspapers called him the model of American rise. He spoke at dinners about effort, thrift, and opportunity. He told crowds how a messenger boy reached the boardroom. His Scottish accent softened, but never vanished. People listened because the story was real. Wealth brought houses, travel, and a larger circle. He kept a New York residence and spent summers in Scotland. He hosted guests who wanted deals or ideas over supper. He walked factory floors in a plain suit the next week. He liked simple habits, even when rooms were grand. The contrast made him stand out. Writers put him in the same breath as the era's giants. His name appeared with financiers, oilmen, and railroad chiefs. Some praised him as a builder who fed national growth. Others warned that such power darkened the public square. He learned to accept applause and protest in the same day. Fame was now part of the job. He spoke often about education and personal duty. He argued that money should be used to lift people up. He said success meant little if it died in a bank. Those ideas drew both interest and suspicion. Was this belief or a shield against criticism? The question followed him from hall to hall. Smoke from the stacks told two different stories. To some, it meant jobs, bridges, and tracks across a continent. To others, it meant illness, noise, and a sky without stars. The mills paid wages and also took strength from bodies. The city grew richer and also more crowded and harsh. Progress had a price not everyone wanted to pay. By the late 1880s, his empire looked unshakable. Mills were busy, contracts were long, and costs stayed low. He stood as a symbol of the Gilded Age in full glow, but symbols also cast shadows that you cannot ignore. Strains in labor and public trust kept building. The next chapter would show how hard that strain could pull. The Homestead contract with the steelworkers neared its end in 1892. Henry Clay Frick, now chairman, pushed for wage cuts and tighter control. Talks with the Amalgamated Association stalled and then broke down. Frick posted notices, set a deadline, and prepared for a lockout. Fences rose around the works, topped with wire and watchtowers. The mill looked less like a factory and more like a fort. Workers answered with a strike and a firm picket line. Families gathered near the river and the gates day and night. They wanted a fair scale, a voice, and respect for their union. Community leaders tried to mediate, but neither side bent. Frick hired Pinkerton agents to retake the plant by force. The plan set two hard wills on a single course. Before dawn on July 6th, barges carrying Pinkertons pushed up the river. Strikers watched the dark shapes and sounded the alarm across town. Words turned to shouts, and shouts turned to gunfire. The banks shook with fear, smoke, and sudden loss. After hours of violence, the Pinkertons surrendered under guard. The day ended with bodies, grief, and fury on both sides. News of the battle raced across the country by telegraph. Reporters crowded Homestead and sent detailed accounts to big papers. Images of armed guards and wounded workers shocked readers. Church pulpits, union halls, and club rooms argued the blame. The plant stayed closed, the town stayed tense, and tempers ran hot. Nothing about the standoff felt temporary anymore. Soon the state militia marched into Homestead to restore order. Soldiers lined the streets and occupied the mill grounds. With troops on site, Frick restarted parts of the works. Replacement crews entered under guard while locals watched in silence. Skirmishes faded, but bitterness deepened with each passing day. The balance had shifted against the Union. Then, an anarchist named Alexander Berkman attacked Frick in his office. Frick survived, wounded but unbending, and returned to work quickly. The act hurt public sympathy for the strike's cause. Union leaders condemned the violence and tried to steady support. Still, the tide turned as weeks dragged on and paychecks stopped. By autumn, the strike broke, and the Union at Homestead fell. Carnegie was in Scotland when Homestead erupted into violence. He had trusted Frick to manage costs and labor at the mills. Telegrams and letters flew across the Atlantic with urgent updates. He issued statements that sounded sympathetic, yet stayed firm on policy. Critics said he spoke softly, while hard measures ruled the ground. That contrast cut into his public image like a blade. Newspapers questioned the Steel King who preached opportunity and peace. Editorials asked how libraries and lockouts could come from one man. Political cartoons drew him with open hands and closed gates. Lectures he once gave about duty and kindness were quoted back at him. Some admirers held steady, pointing to jobs and growth. Many others saw hypocrisy and said so loudly. Congressional voices and state officials called for investigations. Labor leaders toured cities and told Homestead's story in halls and churches. Business groups defended order, contracts, and investor confidence. Clergy split along lines of charity and discipline. The press printed every speech, letter, and rumor available. Opinion hardened into camps that rarely met in the middle. Inside the company, managers focused on production numbers. Orders still had to ship, and quality still had to hold. Cost sheets showed gains even while the public storm raged. Contracts with railroads and shipbuilders did not pause. Investors watched yields instead of headlines when they chose. The gap between profit and perception kept widening. Carnegie's name now carried a shadow wherever it appeared. Doors still opened, but conversations started with pointed questions. He defended his ideals and praised education as the true ladder. He argued that high wages must rest on low costs and steady demand. He told friends the future would judge motives as well as outcomes. Yet, he knew the moment had etched a mark that would last. The Homestead story forced a hard truth into the light. Great fortunes could rise, while great tensions rose beneath them. The country was changing, and so were its expectations of power. People asked what rights workers held in a modern factory age. They asked what duties owners owed beyond pay and profit. Those questions would follow Carnegie into every public room. While the storm brewed, business still sought larger horizons. Carnegie's network reached across the Atlantic to buyers and partners. Rails, plate, and structural steel found markets abroad. Railways in South America, Europe, and the Empire needed durable metal. Shipyards wanted armor and beams they could trust at sea. The mills in Pennsylvania aimed to supply that reach. He built relationships with agents who understood foreign demand. They mapped port access, tariffs, and delivery schedules in detail. Long contracts turned shipments into reliable streams of cash. Currency risks were managed with careful terms and stable banks. The aim was not one sale, but a standing presence. repeat orders mattered more than a lucky season. World's fairs and exhibitions offered stages for industrial pride. Carnegie products appeared beside engines, turbines, and new machines. Engineers traded methods, alloys, and tests over crowded tables. Visitors saw how steel reshaped bridges, stations, and skylines. In that arena, reputation was as valuable as price. A proven mill earned trust at first glance. Carnegie spoke often about trade as a bridge between nations. He believed commerce tied interests together and lowered the odds of war. He argued that railroads and telegraphs knit the world into neighbors. He dreamed of disputes solved by courts instead of cannon. Industry, he said, could push leaders toward reason. The idea sounded grand, and it guided his voice abroad. At home, integration strengthened his hand in global deals. Ore from the lakes, coke from Frick, and mills on the rivers built certainty. Owning the chain allowed promises foreign rivals could not match. Timelines looked better when he controlled every step. Quality looked safer when one system bore the risk. Buyers preferred a supplier who made delays someone else's problem. Even so, the Homestead scar traveled with the brand. European papers covered the strike and the armed standoff. Buyers asked quiet questions about stability and future labor peace. Carnegie answered with numbers, schedules, and a calm smile. He promised delivery and delivered on time. Performance remained the strongest argument he could make. Homestead did not fade from Carnegie's mind when the mills quieted. He replayed the choices, the push, and the painful outcome. He weighed costs saved against the human cost paid. He asked himself where duty lay when profit and people collide. The questions did not have quick answers, and he knew it. He took the long road through them, not the easy one. Years earlier, he had written about the gospel of wealth. He said wealth should be used during one's lifetime for the public good. After Homestead, that belief felt less like an essay and more like a charge. He spoke about lifting communities through education and access. He argued that knowledge opens doors, wages alone cannot. The idea grew teeth and urgency inside him. He studied models of public giving that built skills, not dependence. A library, he said, gives the mind tools to climb. A university opens paths for talent that money often hides. A research grant discovers solutions that markets will later scale. He focused on gifts that multiplied themselves. He wanted every dollar to work harder than he ever had. Private letters from this period show a steady, searching tone. He praised partners for efficiency and scolded waste with care. Yet he also urged fairness that kept dignity intact. He asked managers to think about safety before speed. He promised to help towns beyond the payroll. The voice sounded firmer and quieter at once. He told friends that peace between classes needed more than sermons. It needed common rooms where people could learn and rise. It needed places where a child from any street could study. It needed chances that did not depend on last names. Opportunity, he said, should be a public utility. He decided his fortune would fund that utility. This turning did not erase Homestead, nor did it excuse it. It did, however, set the arc of his remaining years. Business would still demand focus, but purpose would drive the agenda. He saw his role shifting from builder to steward. He wanted to leave tools rather than trophies. The plan for giving took shape beside the books of steel. By the late 1890s, Carnegie had built all he set out to build. The mills ran hard, the system worked, and the numbers sang. He was aging into a different season of life and thought. He had married Louise Whitfield and cherished time at home. Their daughter, Margaret, brought new light into his days. The pull of family grew stronger than the pull of furnaces. Industry was also changing in ways that favored consolidation. Banks gathered capital to combine competing firms into trusts. J.P. Morgan believed stability beat price wars and chaos. He saw Carnegie Steel as the anchor of a larger whole. Quiet talks opened through intermediaries and trusted friends. The question was not interest, but terms. Carnegie's motives were a blend of principle and practical sense. He wanted freedom to focus on learning, peace, and public work. He knew another downturn could lead to another hard conflict. He feared age would dull his edge in a game that rewards speed. He preferred to depart on a high rather than cling too long. Timing, as ever, was strategy. Meetings brought numbers, valuations, and visions to the table. Lawyers shaped structures while bankers tested the math. Managers weighed what a merger meant for plants and crews. Risks were listed beside rewards with uncommon honesty. Carnegie listened, asked tight questions, and took his notes. He kept his counsel until his mind was sure. Meanwhile, he continued to drive efficiency inside the works. He wanted the company at peak fitness for any outcome. Contracts were honored, deliveries stayed on time, and quality held. He refused to let purchase rumors slow the engine. Reputation would travel into any new structure. He intended it to arrive strong and clean. By 1901, the pathway in front of him looked clear. A deal could knit rivals into a single steel giant. A sale could fund a life of service beyond production. A transfer of power could calm markets and quiet competition. He felt both the weight and relief of the decision. The next chapter would turn that decision into history. By the turn of the 20th century, the steel industry was booming but unstable. Fierce price wars, oversupply, and tense rivalries kept markets shaky. J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in America, wanted consolidation to bring stability. Charles M. Schwab, president of Carnegie Steel, presented a bold plan to unite competitors. The plan envisioned one giant company controlling the majority of U.S. steel production. For it to work, Carnegie Steel had to be part of it. Andrew Carnegie, at 66, had been thinking of retirement. His fortune was secure, and his interest in philanthropy was growing stronger. Morgan approached quietly, using trusted intermediaries to gauge interest. Carnegie surprised many by not resisting the idea. He saw a chance to leave business on his own terms and at the peak of his power. The first discussions were discreet, but the stakes could not have been higher. The decisive moment came in a simple exchange. Carnegie wrote a figure on a slip of paper: $303,450,000 in 5% bonds. That price would sell his empire outright. Morgan studied the note, recognized the fairness, and agreed without bargaining. It was the kind of deal only two men of their stature could finalize so swiftly. For Carnegie, it was both an ending and a beginning. In early 1901, U.S. Steel was born, combining Carnegie's empire with major rivals. It became the largest steel company in the world, employing over 160,000 people. Its sheer size promised market stability and unprecedented output. Carnegie received his payment in bonds, ensuring a steady income for life. With this, he officially stepped away from the business world. He had transformed raw ambition into unmatched industrial power, and now into liquid wealth. The deal made Carnegie the richest man in America, perhaps the richest in the world. But for him, the money was not an endpoint. It was the tool to fulfill a vision he had spoken of for years: the responsible use of wealth for the greater good. The sale freed him from the demands of industry. It gave him the time, means, and moral freedom to become what he called a trustee for the people. In 1889, more than a decade before selling his company, Carnegie had laid out his philosophy in The Gospel of Wealth. The essay was a public declaration of how the rich should handle their fortunes. Carnegie argued that the wealthy had a moral obligation to distribute their money during their lifetimes. Wealth, he believed, should fund projects that improve society and empower individuals. Idle hoarding, he said, was both wasteful and shameful. He rejected the idea of indiscriminate charity. Giving money without purpose, he warned, could breed dependency rather than independence. True generosity should provide tools, education, training, and access to knowledge, so people could improve themselves. A library, he said, was worth more than a handout because it gave a lifetime of opportunity. This belief shaped the way he would later spend his fortune. Carnegie also supported government policies to prevent extreme wealth from passing unchanged to heirs. He favored progressive taxes on large fortunes and an estate tax to encourage giving. He saw concentrated wealth as dangerous if left uncontrolled. Public policy, in his view, should encourage the wealthy to act as responsible stewards, not private hoarders. It was a controversial stance, but one he defended consistently. Timing, Carnegie insisted, was critical in philanthropy. The rich should give while alive to ensure the money was used well. Seeing the results firsthand allowed for adjustments and improvements. Leaving wealth to be distributed after death, he argued, often meant wasted potential. The act of giving was not just about generosity. It was about active engagement in solving society's problems. The gospel of wealth did not excuse Carnegie's hard-edged business tactics, and he knew it. But it became his moral framework for the second half of his life. After 1901, the essay was no longer just words on a page. It became his daily guide. Every new project and grant could be traced back to the principles he set down in that landmark document. Carnegie's first great philanthropic passion was public libraries. He funded the construction of more than 2,500 libraries across the United States and in other countries. His grants always came with a condition. The community had to provide the land and agree to maintain the library. He would fund the building, ensuring it would be a lasting resource. This approach guaranteed local commitment to the institution's success. These libraries became transformative spaces in countless towns. Children discovered books that opened their imaginations. Workers used the facilities to study for better careers. Immigrants found resources to learn English and understand American civic life. Community groups met in reading rooms that became hubs of local culture. A Carnegie Library was more than a building. It was an opportunity center. Carnegie also turned his attention to higher education. In 1900, he founded the Carnegie Technical Schools in Pittsburgh. These schools specialized in practical, career-focused training for working-class students. Over time, they became the Carnegie Institute of Technology and later Carnegie Mellon University. His goal was to match educational opportunity with the real needs of industry and society. He also invested heavily in the arts. Carnegie Hall in New York became one of the world's most prestigious concert venues. It hosted legendary performances and exposed audiences to a wide range of musical traditions. To Carnegie, the arts were not luxuries, but essential to a well-rounded society. Music and culture, he believed, elevated the human spirit and strengthened communities. Beyond the United States, Carnegie funded projects with global impact. He established the Carnegie Institution for Science. To support groundbreaking research, he created the Carnegie Hero Fund to honor ordinary people who performed extraordinary acts of bravery. In Scotland, he endowed trusts to support students and universities. His name became synonymous with both opportunity and high standards. Carnegie believed that peace was not only a moral ideal, but an economic necessity. Wars, he argued, destroyed wealth and halted progress. He saw commerce and diplomacy as tools to prevent conflict. If nations were bound by trade, they would have more to lose by fighting. This belief led him to invest heavily in international peace initiatives. In 1910, he founded the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. The organization's mission was to promote peaceful conflict resolution and foster cooperation between nations. It funded research into international law, arbitration, and disarmament. The endowment published influential reports and organized conferences attended by world leaders. Carnegie envisioned it as a permanent force for good. He also funded the construction of the Peace Palace in The Hague, completed in 1913. The building became the home of the International Court of Justice and a symbol of global cooperation. Nations from around the world contributed to its creation, sending gifts that adorned its halls. For Carnegie, the Peace Palace represented the physical embodiment of his ideals. Carnegie personally corresponded with political leaders, urging them to resolve disputes peacefully. He praised acts of restraint and warned against hasty military action. He funded prizes for those who advanced the cause of peace. He supported educational programs to teach the value of diplomacy to future generations. His advocacy was as relentless as his business drive had once been. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 was a crushing blow. The conflict shattered the optimism that had fueled his peace efforts. Carnegie retreated from public appearances, deeply saddened by the failure of diplomacy. Yet his institutions continued their work, laying the groundwork for future international cooperation. He believed the ideas would outlast the war. Even during the war, the Carnegie Endowment gathered information and trained diplomats. It worked to prepare for a post-war world where peace might have another chance. Carnegie never abandoned his vision, even if he did not live to see it realized. His peace work remains one of the most enduring parts of his legacy. After selling Carnegie Steel, Andrew divided his time between philanthropy and family. He spent much of the year at Shadow Brook, his estate in Lenox, Massachusetts. He enjoyed quiet walks, music, and the company of his wife, Louise. His daughter, Margaret, was the joy of his later life. He also traveled, visiting many of the institutions he had funded. In 1911, he created the Carnegie Corporation of New York to manage his remaining wealth. The corporation became the central channel for his giving. It funded education, research, libraries, and cultural institutions. Its grants reached communities in the United States and abroad. Carnegie wanted the organization to outlive him and carry on his principles. Friends and visitors often remarked on his warmth and curiosity. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and enjoyed discussing ideas. He liked seeing progress reports from his funded projects. He valued measurable results and was quick to support innovative approaches. Yet, he also appreciated simple pleasures, from a good book to a family meal. His health began to decline during World War I. The violence and destruction in Europe weighed heavily on him. He continued to approve grants and encourage his foundation's work. But his public appearances became rare. He focused on ensuring that his philanthropic network could operate without him. Planning for continuity became his final project. Andrew Carnegie died on August 11, 1919, at the age of 83. He passed away peacefully at Shadow Brook, surrounded by family. Tributes poured in from around the world, praising his generosity and vision. Some also reflected on the contradictions in his life: ruthless in business, idealistic in giving. His name was permanently etched into the story of American industry and philanthropy. Historians still debate his legacy. He was a man of intense ambition and strong beliefs. His methods were sometimes harsh, but his contributions were vast. He left behind a network of institutions that continue to shape education, science, and culture. Whether viewed as a hero or a flawed visionary, Andrew Carnegie remains one of history's most influential figures.